Being treated differently just because you are different is wrong, or so we are told. On paper, those with disabilities have the same rights as everyone else. Access to service, buildings, and information are limited or not accessible as it would be to those without disabilities, however. Americans have personal rights and freedoms that are guaranteed to them, and it's a decent system. But in execution, there is more to be desired. The American with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, was an important step in getting equal access to the rights promised by the government. But even with that, discrimination and social prejudice still exist and is still prevalent in today's society. The main issue that is going to be discussed, though, is job discrimination. Even though it is illegal to discriminate on the basis of disability alone. Of course, that does not apply to situations where harm could befall that person or others, like the military. Of course, many businesses do discriminate based on disability, but knowing that it is not legal, they find other reasons to not hire someone or to fire someone with a disability. Of course, proving this is difficult. It would have to be up to that person to prove that it is discrimination, which, as I've mentioned, is hard to prove. Finding jobs in America is already difficult, with places in a seemingly constant state of hiring, but never actually gaining anyone just for benefits from the state. Just adding in another problem, another reason not to hire someone, makes it even harder to get a job. Discrimination based on disability in the workplace is against the ADA, because employers put the burden of proof on the person with disability to prove that a reasonable accommodation does not put an undue hardship on the employer, even though the ADA states the opposite is the case. To start, what constitutes as disabilities in employer discrimination? According to the ADA, the term disability means with respect to an individual, a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities of such individual, b a record of impairment impairment, or C, being regarded as having such an impairment, as described in paragraph 3, ADA 1990. This shows that we have a broad classification of what constitutes a disability. And the next step is who constitutes as an employer. The term employer means a person engaged in an industry affecting commerce who has 15 or more employees for each working day in each of 20 or more calendar weeks in the current or preceding calendar year, and any agent of such person except that for 2 years following the effective date of this subchapter. An employer means a person engaged in an industry affecting commerce who has 25 or more employees for each working day in each of the 20 or more calendar weeks. ADA 1990. That defines what constitutes as employer, but there are some exceptions listed by the ADA. B. Exceptions: the term employer does not include I. The United States, a corporation wholly owned by the government of the United States or an Indian tribe, or a bona fide private membership other than a labor organization that is exempt from taxation under Section 501(c) of Title 26, ADA 1990. Meaning any private entity that has sole command over the section or land is not to be considered employers. What that can mean is, for instance, the military, based on the fact that it would cause a hardship to accommodate someone in regards to disabilities, based on the fact that it's an organization owned by the government of the United States. You want to hear how that affected me? I have a short on it. And is such exempt from ADA based off the fact that it could get someone hurt or killed in the line of duty. To have someone not meet the standards on the basis of disability. But these exemptions are only applied if reasonably approved by the employer themselves in the case of it causing undue hardship upon them or other employees to accommodate the disability. These protections are given to employees with disabilities by the employers, as we have established, and this is important, because there have been concerns about productivity, which of course would be hindered depending on the disability in question, which means they cannot be fired. Now, they can be fired for low productivity only after they have reasonable accommodations provided by the employer. So, they can still be fired for productivity if after the accommodations are set. All of these have to deal with the employer and employee based on the accommodations necessary to perform the job in question, as long as they are reasonable, of course, under the ADA and current circumstances. Violating the ADA is common in workplaces, from not having accessible entrances to information online, to asking questions that aren't even allowed, and that the burden of proof is on the employee, which makes them the person to file lawsuits against employers for violations, or to prove that they need the accommodations, when the ADA should be more proactive, and have more things in place, so it should be up to the employer on proving that it's an undue hardship upon the company to provide the accommodation, rather than the other way around. And this can all be made possible if the ADA was clearer on what constitutes a reasonable accommodation. While it is clear, as mentioned above, it is kind of vague on what really counts as an undue hardship upon the employer, as it really just states the term undue hardship means an action requiring significant difficulty or expense. ADA 1990. And while it does go on to mention that with financial difficulty constitutes as a hardship, that does not stop employers from lying about expenses or difficulties about providing an accommodation and manipulating the employee. It is vague and subjective in nature, with different views and thoughts on what that could look like or mean. While it does cover factors to consider for undue hardship, it takes a lot of thought, which can make it harder to come to an agreement on if an accommodation is reasonable or a hardship upon the employer. And if an employer decides that it is, they could just take it away, and then it would be up to the employee to fight to get it back, which could involve a long, stressful legal battle. This is important because, as I said, information is not all that accessible. So if you have a disability that affects that, getting that information can be even more difficult than it already is. Citizens can advocate for those with disabilities around them at work, or can speak out against workplace discrimination and be public about it. Individuals in their communities can become a voice, and when many voices come together, they're more likely to be heard by the people in charge and can come about with positive changes. As a young, hard-of-hearing member of the deaf community, this is important because finding jobs is already hard enough. But when you have a disability, no matter the severity, there is already going to be thoughts on accommodations and how much money it will cost. It will make them more likely to find a reason not to hire an individual with a disability. Not all employers think like this, of course, but the majority do think about money. That is what corporations and businesses care about, and if becoming an expense is required by law for them, why should they have to pay something when they can just look harder for any reason at all to hire, not to hire, or even to fire someone with the thought in mind of saving money? This will affect future employment, as not being able to get a job will lead to inexperience, or long stretches without jobs, or in the case of being let go, the reason for that will always be there, even if it's a lied about reason, which will make future employers look at that and have that in mind during the interview and hiring process. References: Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 as amended 2008. Thank you for watching. This is something that I have written in the past week for a college American government class, and I want your thoughts on it. Now, it's already submitted, so I can't make any edits to it, so I can't take suggestions there. But you guys aren't really the judges of it, my teacher is. But I do want to hear your thoughts on this issue with disability employment and how it affects people daily on the regular with getting hired. Thank you for watching.